Welcome back to the home front. I'm your host, Reed Yalen. Today, I'm joined by journalist Heidi Przybyla. She is an award-winning investigative and television correspondent who is championing new approaches to reporting and delivering news that put the American people first. She is a veteran journalist who has regularly broken exclusive reporting on how White House, congressional, and presidential policy impacts everyday Americans. Her reporting has spanned leading newspaper, digital, radio, and television outlets. She's appeared on CNN, PBS, NPR, CBS, ABC, Fox, and across NBC News platforms. Heidi, welcome.
Thank you, Reed. Great to be here.
I don't know the last, I'm sure I've interviewed you before, but it's been a while. So tell me, what has been keeping you busy these last few months?
I've been very busy, and I'm excited though to now start talking about what I've been doing because I left my position as a national correspondent at Politico now almost a year ago. And I treated that period, Reed, as I would any other investigative project, except my project was figuring out how do we start to build the newsroom of the future. I was looking at the numbers, Reed, and it is just tragic how many reporters we've lost, not in these national coastal newsrooms, which is happening there too, but all across middle America. Just within the past 10 to 20 years, we've lost 3 out of every 4 local reporters, which is shocking. And I don't think a lot of people know that. And what folks also need to understand is that loss of local trusted voices runs in complete parallel in unison with the decline in trust in our democratic institutions. I'm not saying it's all of it, but it is a major contributing factor when you lose that local trusted anchor. And you don't just lose them, but what fills it is corrosive and harmful to our communities and to good information flows.
Right. And it's funny you bring that up. I mean, my dad started as a local news radio guy in college, first calling local baseball games, and then he just did the news and he did commentary. I have some other friends whose, this is obviously back in the 60s and 70s, but they got their start in local newsrooms, right? And they went on to really fabulous careers, but their underpinning was that local reporting in places from Riverside, California to, Western Massachusetts and everywhere in between. And to your point, I mean, look, I live in a small town. It's not an average small town where we have a very healthy local media outlet. But of course, I live in a ski town, so we are a pretty wealthy little enclave. But we see our reporters, right? We have a newspaper, we have
The
a radio
community.
station. Yeah, we have several, online outlets. So you see these people at the coffee shop, at the grocery store, wherever it is. And so they are part of the community, not just people writing something on a newspaper or reading something on the radio.
There's so many factors that have led to where we are when it comes to polarization, but going back just to 1980 which is kind of where I would put a pin as where all this all kind of began, this descent into hyper polarization and fragmentation of the media and 24/7 cable news that's kind of focused on if it bleeds, it leads, and like
Mm-hmm.
outrage and conflict driven coverage. That's kind of where it all began. And it runs, like I said, in unison with the disappearance of people like that who, yeah, you're lucky you live in a community where you have thriving local news. I do too. But I think the thing that a lot of us didn't fully understand and appreciate was over the past 20, 25 years, when I would travel to middle America with a presidential candidate or go cover a congressional race, that this widening cultural gulf that was happening in front of us and we didn't quite understand why, that local connection also has a lot to do it with it because it makes it easier when you're online and you're just throwing rockets and you don't know who the person is behind the keyboard to say these things and to be more controversial and to stoke those types of unhelpful rhetoric. And now this is what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and rebuild those good local connections, but not in a way that is going back and looking at like just trying to rebuild what we did in the past, because Reed, that's not going to work, right? There's no business model to bring those reporters back. So we have to look at what are other healthy democracies doing? What can we do in this current environment? And what we can do is leverage where the puck is headed. Look, it's a little
I like
controversial.
the hockey reference.
Thank you. I am from Michigan, and I think that was
Proud
Wayne
Michigander.
who coined that. I use it. But I think we need to look at where things are going. And look, a lot of people in my industry, and I was one of them for a long time, were very resentful of this social media revolution and folks who have no journalistic training taking our material and running up much more engagement and exposure than those of us who did the hard shoe leather work to obtain that information. And trust me, that those are strong feelings inside newsrooms right now. But at the same time, we have to accept that this is where it's going. The audience is going to video, it's going to social. And our failure to innovate has been at the heart of this. Now, I don't want to blame the victim because I think there's a lot of those of us who tried to innovate inside big institutions, but the business model is broken and we need to do something different.
So let's go through a couple of things. One is my least favorite form of information delivery. I'm not going to call it news. Is the person who goes on a social media outlet video almost exclusively and says breaking news and then reads an Associated Press headline, right? Like, to your point, okay, and a friend of mine said, look, these people are trusted messengers. I'm like, yeah, but they're not news people, right? They're talking heads who are literally taking advantage both of the work, as they said they did, the information, all of that. And look, I don't feel bad for the AP or anybody else necessarily, but like, this person didn't do any of that work. They turned their iPhone on and said, here's something that happened. Oftentimes with little to no context and with no, like, what are you going to do about it now? Right? It's just, here, I know I got to post 10 clips today. I know I got to generate 100,000 eyeballs on this or however many thousands of clicks. And this is how I do it. But again, no, people aren't necessarily better informed, and they're certainly not better informed as to what they could as citizens do about something.
Right. And those folks are, of course, getting amazing brand deals and making income off of that content and engagement that they're getting that was essentially created by the journalist, while at the same time we're losing our journalists, right? So at some point that all runs into a brick wall if these folks don't have the base content to work with. So two things. We need to find a way to make the journalists the person who is delivering that information. Right now, we're in crisis mode. We're losing so many journalists. A lot of newsrooms are upset and it's scared of lawfare and potentially being targeted for some of the big investigative type work that is most in service of democracy. So what we need is like a more institutional approach to making the journalists the ones who can own their content and be the ones who deliver it and be branded as such so people know where they're getting their information from, but then also offer a space for people who are creators because they are the amplifiers. And what you're seeing right now is an ecosystem forming, and it's messy and it's disorganized. And it's, there's a lot of people forming different types of models that might work or might not work. But roughly speaking, you're seeing these categories form of like you have the journalist, who is the person who creates the content, right? Then you have explainers, people who are kind of explaining it and riffing on it a bit. And then you have like what I would consider like the modern op ed writers, which are these creator folks who, I'm not talking about the ones who just recycle it and read the headlines. Okay. Let's put that aside. The people who actually put creative energy into creating a video that has a little bit of perspective to it, a point of view, we have to find a way to work with them. And they can be considered amplifiers of the base content. But how do we bring the journalists back in? That's what I'm working on.
Well, and let me ask you this too, because you mentioned, traveling with presidential campaigns, and I used to be, if you were the person sitting in the filing center, I was probably the guy who, remember how long ago when we had to
Filing
work with
centers.
work with the local telephone guy to lay the AT&T lines and all the other stuff, right? It's just positively quaint now. But the other part is, those people the journalists in those local areas, again, they know their people, they know their communities. I find that many of the arguments that are generated, or the discussions that are generated by local issues in my town, right, are often far more heated and exciting than whatever's going on the Drudge Report or whatever the breaking news dude is, right? Because that has no, like, okay, yeah, it might have an impact on your life, but not on your day-to-day life, not in your neighborhood, not in, like, my whole street just had the local rec organization's going to ask for another tax increase. And we're like, why do they need more money? Right? Like, the last board meeting I went to, they're like, we have the money, we might as well spend it. And like, the top of my head came off, and I called the local, like, you believe what they just said? And that's the kind of stuff where people are like, are you kidding? But the other part that I'm a little bit worried about at the national level is that so many of the journalists that are being produced are going from a fairly well-to-do background to begin with, to a probably small to mid-sized liberal arts school, straight to Northwestern, injected straight into Washington, D.C. or New York. And then when they go to Iowa or New Hampshire, they treat it like an anthropological experiment, as opposed to, like, I understand that people in Iowa don't walk around with pork chops in their pockets all day.
This is part of why we need to be thinking about what is a journalist and what is a creator a little bit differently, because I think those trusted voices don't necessarily have to always be someone who's been through an elite journalism school. I didn't go through an elite journalism school, right? And as long as we are keeping people in kind of like their categories of what type of information am I delivering, that is a huge service to the public. I mean, Reed, what you're seeing is you and I may have access to this kind of good local information. And yes, it is fun and it's engaging to know what's going on in your community because you actually know the people. But in many parts of the country, there's no visibility into what their local government is doing, kind of city hall meetings, even just like community, like what is happening in my town, like cultural events, good eats, things that bring us together. Because I think all of us understand what part of what needs to happen to heal this country is people have to start meeting in person again.
1000%.
And that happens at the local level. But we need to do this at scale, right? So this is not about just parachuting into a community. This is about giving communities back the toolkits to create these good information streams. And we have an opportunity here. Call me naive, optimistically naive, but I think it's possible with technology and with this new creator revolution to recreate those good information pathways. And it's more urgent than ever because, and this is why we're calling our new organization GetReal, it's going to be hard for us to know what's real anymore. We're there. It's happening right now with AI, and it's happening in force. I'm sure you see it all over your feeds. People creating synthetic videos. There needs to be some way of knowing what's real, some kind of a watermark or a seal, and it has to be at scale, a system, right? And a toolkit to give communities to be able to do that. So I'm thinking big here.
Good.
I think it's possible. I think it's all possible. We have the technology to do these things, and we have what I would call like a modern citizen journalism core of folks who are ready and willing to serve in these creator groups. I think we should embrace them. I don't think we should be resentful that they're trying to take our content, except the ones who are masquerading as journalists. Just find how that all fits together in the ecosystem so that the journalists can still be supported to do the good public service journalism that they do. We need more investigative journalists, especially right now. And what I'm worried about is that it's becoming harder and harder to perform that essential civic function. I am an investigative journalist. I'm off the field because I'm building something different, but there are many of us inside newsrooms who are just out there on their own right now. It is a tough environment.
Well, and as you noted, I mean, look, the business model of remembering going to my grandmother's house in Ohio for the summer, and when I was a kid, she got 2 newspapers a day. She got the morning news and she got the afternoon paper, right? And she had Paul Harvey on all day or whatever that was. And that was a business model that had worked for what, 80 years, 100 years. Now, you spent a lot of time on what, NBC, MSNBC. That's a model that's dying before our eyes. I mean, hell, they're
Yes.
going to change their name here in the next 10 days. CNN is going into its second online iteration, right? Now, let me just ask this. Like, you spent a lot of time on cable news. Like, I've been on cable. I probably do one hit a week, maybe two hits a week. I don't know. Doesn't matter. But like, I'm not going to pay $7.99 for CNN Plus. I don't watch it anyway. Why the hell would I pay for it?
We're awash in free content now. That's
Right.
that's that's the challenge, is how do you support the underlying base product, the good journalism, when there's just so much content washing around now. And also, when you bring up like the cables, how do we prevent this from fragmenting even further? Because frankly, that's what I'm worried about as well, is a lot of us are leaving, we're finding new ways to, for instance, create newsletters, but those are making the silos even smaller, right?
Mm-hmm.
A big part of the problem that we've had with polarization and the media's role in that is that information was highly siloed, and people literally within families are living in completely different information ecosystems. So, how do we create something that is a force multiplier at scale so that we're not making this siloing problem even worse? And that's a huge problem right now, with newspapers continuing to go under. We have not figured out what is that new business model. What I can tell you, Reed, is that from looking at what works in healthier democracies, it is not viewing journalism the way that we viewed it practically for most of our history. So that's going to be a real challenge, right? Like, we've always, the thing that distinguishes us from a lot of other healthier democracies right now, I would argue, is that we've always treated good information as a commodity, right? Even your grandmother's newspaper, she probably paid some minor amount in
Oh
order
yeah,
to get those
of course.
newspapers, right? Whereas many other countries, like the Nordic countries, even in Canada and to a certain extent in Great Britain, there's some kind of a collective approach. And don't get me wrong, I am not talking about state run media, okay, or state funded. I'm talking about thinking creatively about how we can more collectively fund media as a citizenry, not by the state. I know that's how they do it. But what you're seeing right now is that there is a massive drop just within the past 5 to 10 years in trust in media, and it runs right to left.
Mm-hmm.
When you talk to people, they say it's because of the corporate. The corporate is the word that they talk about, right? So when you're talking about restoring trust, how do you get back to more collectively funding media? There are other models, and we just have to be brave enough again to skate to where the puck is going.
So I want to say one thing that you brought up about, the quote unquote state funding of media, because this is the dichotomy of a democratic society, small d democratic society, which is, I think, and this is where look, you have dealt with it from your side. I have dealt with. You're going to ask the question you want to ask, right? I'm going to give you the answer I want to give, and Mitt Romney famously said, right? But part of a healthy democratic society is understanding that, like, no, if I am, let's say, City Hall, right, and we make a decision as a city council, that we're going to give an annual grant to 4 media outlets, that they might not always write good things about us. But the ironic part is, while we individually as city council members may be less trusted or less liked or less likely to get elected because of something that independent news outlet came up with, but the institution in and of itself might be more well thought of because it has said, you know what, we're going to be held accountable, right? We are going to do things that are going to allow the populace to know exactly what's going on. And too often we see that that's not the case. Like, the natural inclination of power is not to be accountable, right? That's not it.
And Reed, that culture of accountability that you're talking about has only been a recent norm in our history in America. And I think for our generation, especially, it's hard to conceive of that this is just a norm. And it's something that's been much more recent in our history. If you go back, for instance, all the way back to the revolution, politicians used newspapers to push their political agenda. Like the popular press was considered toxic in the lead up to the Civil War. I'm from Dearborn, Michigan, where 1918, I think it was, Henry Ford purchased the Dearborn Independent and he used it for a vehicle for anti Semitic disinformation. So, what we're seeing is how quickly those norms can collapse when we as a society are not collectively supporting them. So what happened here, to distill it down to its essence over the past 10 to 20 years, is that we lost our business model. We lost our business model. And when we lose our revenue, our advertising, our subscriptions, we lose our independence. I think it was Joseph Pulitzer said, circulation means advertising, and advertising means money, and money means independence. And we are seeing now what happens when these institutions are replaced, again, with all of this cacophony of actors who include no longer gatekeepers like Walter Cronkite's, but folks who are pseudo journalists and even anti-journalists. I would argue there's a huge portion of the media now that has actually made their mark in being anti-journalist. We are the generation, I think, that can communicate this norm for the next one, because a lot of what I'm concerned about also is just like the cynicism of the next generation, because they're seeing that how quickly this is collapsing. But we don't know anything else, the folks who are our age, because we had the benefit of living in this period, this Renaissance period, where, look, I covered a lot of White Houses, and going all the way up to Bush, there was that agreement, there was that understanding, and you could see it, that they hated that they'd have to come out and talk to us and they'd have to answer the question. But that's all slipping away very quickly.
So I think about, you mentioned Cronkite, and I think of Cronkite and another guy, Tim Russert. And the thing that both of them had that I think was so incredible, aside from their just innate talent, was that they were part of the establishment. They, like, everybody would want Walter or Tim at a party or a reception, and if he showed up, that would be a huge thing. But they also knew that if, like, Walter was going to hold the establishment to account when he needed to, i.e., Vietnam. This war is not winnable anymore, right? Tim Russert. If you sat at Tim Russert's table on a Sunday morning, you had better be prepared, because he wasn't going to pull any punches on you, right? He was going to tell you and that was what made both of them so magical, was they were part of something bigger than themselves, understood its own shortcomings, willing to hold it to account, and, to your point, lacked cynicism. They did not believe that all of this was a zero-sum game, that there was that their role was as important as a legislator's or a president's, right? That's why it's called the Fourth Estate, right? It was a key component to democratic processes. And all of that, to your point, whether or not it's the corporatization of media, it's the dying of newspapers, it's the, we think about Rupert Murdoch, but as you noted, before Rupert Murdoch, there was William Randolph Hearst, right? You write the story, I'll find the war, whatever the hell he said, right? Like, these are not new phenomena, but the difference is they move so much faster now. So now, how does GetReal help start eating the elephant, right? How do you take that first bite?
It has to be ground up. We have got to restore trust. The loss of faith in media and each other is fundamental. And the way to do that is to hand it back to the people and to allow them to become part of the solution. Again, call them creators, call them citizen journalists. We have to go back into communities at the community level and give people the information that they want. This cannot be a push down of continually roundtables of talking about polarizing national issues and choreographed such that we are making the conflict the story. We need to have a balanced diet of information again, right? Think about a newspaper, how a newspaper is laid out. It's like a full meal. Has your sweets table, I guess, depending on what you're into, whether it's Dear Abby or the sports section. You had your local section, you had your national section. How do we recreate those good information flows? That's what we're working on. And the way you do it is you give people what they want. They want that hyper local information. And if you can find a way to use technology and creators to give it back to them and to start getting back into people's lives and show each other our humanity, that's how you do it. And have open debates again. Look, I know I'm talking way down because we're like here. We're starting these local information flows again. But that's how you do it. It's we're calling it grassroots. It's not political at all, but it is grassroots because we're changing the way that people get information by enlisting the community to be part of it. Because once again, wouldn't we all love to go back to having those trusted voices, those journalists, but they're gone, Reed, and we don't have the business model to bring them back. So we have to work with the technology and the trends and the communities that are being built.
So, all right. So, how does, if I live in a small town or any community, big town too, but I want to start working as a citizen journalist, how do I do it?
You contact us.
Okay.
We're going into we're going into specific areas right now. So this is a project we'll be starting in Pennsylvania. And we have a lot of independent journalists who are already working with us. And we have creators who are excited to work with us as well. And we're letting everybody have their lane, right? This is a journalist. This person worked hard to get this information for you. This person may or may not have gone to journalism school, but they have journalistic training and they are originating the content. They may work for the newspaper. They may be independent. And then there's these other categories of information, including people who are giving their point of view. That's valuable information too, but they're different from a journalist. You see?
Sure. Because again, as you said, if you think about it like a newspaper, you got the front page, you got the headline above the fold, below the fold, you got inside, you got the style section, they used to call it at the Post. I don't know what they call it anymore, if they even still have it. You got the crossword, you got sports, right? So like, and that's the thing. So, how many, if let's say if we went back 60 years, Heidi, how many American men would say that they read the sports section first? Probably the vast majority of them, right? It wouldn't be, oh yeah, I'm going to read. They might read it on the train on the way to work, right? Or during their lunch hour.
While they were there, they're getting good information too about their local communities or about national issues from a source that they trusted.
Right. But I think it also, with what you're talking about too, it also gives people the opportunity to learn something and then marinate on it. Right.
Yes.
Which I think that's the other part, that the unending stream of stuff, which I am certainly guilty of contributing to, is I'm probably subscribed to 35 Substacks, right? There's no possible way I read them all every day. It's an impossibility. I do nothing else, right? And so that's the other part, is that you want to say, no, look, I live in Dearborn. I am born, raised in Dearborn, or maybe I moved here with my family, whatever it is, but I am your neighbor. I'm part of your community. Like, here are the things that are going on. And again, it could be what happened, at the rivalry football game. It could be the farmer's market, whatever it could be. But the truth is that I see this in my community. Like, people like to be out and about, right? Like, they don't like, I just heard this stat earlier today. The average American spends 90% of their day indoors.
Oh, really?
90%.
Look at us indoors.
Yeah, I mean, look, we could do that. We could have class outside. Remember class outside? Class outside was the best.
Yeah.
You weren't actually going to learn anything, but it was the best. Touching grass and all that. But that means that we're only out of our homes, right? Or not even out of our homes. We're actually only an open air 0.4 hours a day. And that's the average, which means half the people are doing less than that.
Yes.
Right.
We want to
And
make
so,
healthy. Look, this is part of it. And we see that there's this demand for it, Reed, because people are already doing this. A number of people in this whole project that I've met who have told me, hey, there's this retired guy in my community, and he's actually the one who's giving us all our news now. It's like this Facebook page, everybody's a part of it. And here's how it started. Like, he started pulling down police reports or events calendar or whatever it is. And boom, like that, he grows his audience because nobody else is doing it.
you're right.
So
First mover.
how do you give people like that the toolkit and the framework and the credibility to become part of something bigger and participating in a way that where they're supported, but they're also credible and they're not pushing bad information? Like that's huge too. Is like some of these people, right, are not putting out content that's helpful as well, married in with whatever local stuff they're doing. So it's an opportunity, it's a problem, but it's also a big opportunity.
Right. And look, I don't care what side, what quote unquote side you operate on. If your sole purpose in life is to jab my adrenal gland as hard as you can to get me to have an angry response, and I have been guilty of this too, don't get me wrong, then you have to ask yourself, are you being constructive? Right? Are you in it for the money? I mean, I see this, Heidi, let me ask you a question that does take it to the what I would call the black hole of America, which is the guy named Donald Trump, which is you see a massive economic system that has been built up around him, a media apparatus, for-profit media apparatus that has been built up around him. Like, what happens when he's gone? Like, what do those people do all day? Right? Like, breaking news, JD Van, like, it's not the same, right?
Yeah. Well, that's look, some of the best days for cable news have been, and well, in the past, not right now, but like in the 2016 election, it felt like there was a lot of revenue being made off of these viral moments of Trump. We would all get around the table and Trump would be the only candidate where if he was going live, we would take the cameras to him. He was the only candidate who would get that kind of treatment because people knew that he was going to say something that was
Crazy.
outrageous or crazy and people would be tuning in for it. That in hindsight, I think everybody understands was extremely detrimental to our democracy, but that's a whole model that isn't just around Donald Trump. It's writ large around social media that the algorithm feeds people. People don't even have control of it, Reed. Think about social media and how crazy this is that we don't decide what we see. The algorithm decides what we see. You have no agency there. And despite what people say, I want to see positive news. I want to see solutions, like the things that they're clicking on, that kind of lizard
Mm-hmm.
brain part of the psyche is what's actually driving it. So you might ask me, how can we accomplish this without some other player entering the arena who doesn't work that way? That isn't like based on these algorithms, which just feed people outrage porn. And look, that's a whole nother part of the solution that I hope folks are working on in terms of new platforms, but there's not a one that doesn't operate like that right now.
Yeah. So tell us, where can folks find more about what you're working on?
Yeah, you can go to our website. It's getrealnews.org. We're also operating on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. I'm going to start talking a little bit more about specifically what we're doing and bringing people along for the journey. So we'd love it if they follow us. We also just launched in Pennsylvania, and you can find us on TikTok at Pennsylvania Reels, Reals.
Awesome. And where can we find you if you still dare to be online somewhere?
I'm online. I'm posting across my channels. I have a personal channel on Instagram. I have a professional page on Facebook, and that's where you can find me. I don't go on Twitter too much. Sometimes a little bit on Threads.
I've been on Twitter a little bit more lately, Heidi, but literally just to troll MAGA freaks. I
It's
don't know why. Maybe it's my own shortcoming, but it's really funny when they lose their minds.
I have one of my biggest followings there. I have like almost 200,000 followers.
Me too.
The crazy thing is like I get very little engagement, so it's just not worth it.
Yeah, no, I agree. It is a cesspool, and it's going to get worse. It took what was Twitter was always far from perfect, but we were all there, right?
Yeah,
We were all there.
it was the town square. It
It,
was the town square.
right, and now it's the back alley that raccoons like Elon Musk reside in. Okay, as always, gang, you can find me on Twitter, TikTok, says.us, at Reed Galen, Threads and Instagram at Reed_Galen USA, and over at Substack, The Home Front. Heidi Przybyla, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Reed. Great to
And
see you.
everybody else, we'll see you next time.